Today on Histories Tech, we are looking at the Lockheed P-80 Shooting Star. The P-80 Shooting Star was the United States' first successful turbojet-powered combat aircraft, replacing the failed program of the P-59 Air Comet. And while its production only lasted 5 years, it was a stepping stone for the United States in terms of jet aircraft, and its variants would continue on into service even into the 2000s. But to understand the story of the P-80, we have to look at the story of the P-59 Air Comet first. I'm not going to go into detail on the P-59. I've already done a video on this, so please go watch that if you'd like to learn more about it. But basically, the problem with the P-59 was, one, it wasn't any faster than any of the contemporary piston engine fighters, and also production on it was incredibly slow. Now, with the P-59 Air Comet behind in development and the Germans and the British being ahead, Army Air Force General Henry H. Arnold went ahead and had a second prototype jet developed. This time, Lockheed decided to join in the development. Utilizing one of their top engineers, Kelly Johnson, the man who developed the P-38 Lightning and would later develop the U-2 and the SR-71 Blackbird, had Johnson's team draw up the design for what would be known as the XP-80. In order to prevent this design from being abandoned by the United States government, Johnson promised that he could have a prototype ready for testing in 150 days. 143 days after his promise, the first XP-80 prototype, Lulu Bell, was delivered. This prototype, powered by a de Havilland Vampire jet fighter engine, first flew on January 8, 1944. In test flighting the aircraft, it was able to reach a speed of 502 miles per hour, making it the first turbojet-powered American aircraft to exceed 500 miles per hour in leveled flight. With the success of this airframe, a second prototype, the XP-80A Gray Ghost, was produced, along with a sister aircraft known as the Silver Ghost. These aircraft were actually 25% larger than the XP-80 due to the fact that they were testing a larger engine and air intake. First pre-production YP-80s were rolled out at the end of 1944, with 4 of them being sent to Europe for demonstration purposes. 2 of these 4 saw the only service of World War II when they were used as reconnaissance aircraft in early 1945. With the end of World War II, the initial production plans of 5,000 aircraft was actually reduced to 2,000. And this number would eventually be reduced to only 1,700. By 1947, the United States Army Air Force no longer existed, and instead the United States Air Force was created. By the following summer of 1948, the P-80 was redesignated the F-80 in line with the new Air Force designations. Roughly around the same time, the United States Navy began testing the P-80 Shooting Star. They needed an aircraft to begin training their pilots in the transition to jet aircraft while their own jet aircrafts were being developed. This aircraft was extremely successful with both the United States Navy and Marine Corps, to the point a Navy-specific variant known as the T-2V Sea Star would be developed in 1957. The only true combat the F-80 saw with the United States military was during the Korean War. They were extremely successful against Yak-9s and Aleutian 10s. The success of the F-80 against its piston-driven counterparts would be quickly ended by the development of the Russian MiG-15. The F-80 only managed to claim 6 kills during the entire Korean War and would be eventually replaced by the North American F-86 Sabre. The F-80 would be retired from the United States military in 1959. However, many of these frames were sold to the countries like Brazil, Chile, Colombia, and Ecuador, and other Latin American countries. That would not be the end of the F-80's legacy. It actually would go on to make multiple variants and even a few derivatives that were extremely successful. One of the more unusual variants was the EF-80 Prone Pilot. Similar to the British program with the Gloucester Meteor Prone Pilot, the idea was to develop a jet aircraft that was better for a pilot when maneuvering at high speeds. The program was dropped in favor of G-suits. Now, another rather unusual variant was the F-80 that had a Schrag music configuration, and basically this had guns in the nose cone that could be elevated and pointed straight upwards, with the idea being that it could be flown underneath an enemy bomber and shoot up. Only one prototype was ever built. While the F-80 had a relatively short career, one of its derivatives, the T-33 Shooting Star, had an amazingly long career. The T-33 Shooting Star was the most produced derivative of the Lockheed P-80 F-80, with more than 6,500 aircraft produced. This aircraft was essentially an F-80, however, it had been lengthened by 3 feet to allow for a second seat and instrumentation. This aircraft would go on to serve more than 30 nations as a jet trainer and would even be converted by several nations into an attack aircraft. Like the F-80 it was built from, it had multiple variants, including the Lockheed II-TV Sea Star, designed specifically for aircraft carrier landings, and the license-built Canadair T-33. But one of the most interesting variants of the T-33 is the Boeing Skyfox. This was an attempt by Boeing to build a modernized version of the T-33, and could potentially have expanded its role as a ground attack vehicle. Only one airframe was ever built before the project was abandoned. The other derivative of the F-80 is known as the F-94 Starfire. This derivative, built from the T-33's fame, was built as an all-weather fighter aircraft and the first United States Air Force aircraft with afterburners. Sadly, this aircraft was shown to have less endurance and greater reliance on ground control interception methods than piston-engine aircraft, and would eventually be relegated to National Guard units. Now, sadly, there are no P-80 F-80s flying in the world today. There are, however, more than 24 of them on display in museums around the world. However, some of them are T-33s that have been converted to look like a P-80 F-80. Now, if you would like to see at least a T-33 fly, there are more than 15 of these aircraft still flying in the United States alone, and there are hundreds of T-33 around the world on display. And there are even a couple of dozen F-94s on display, making the F-80, the T-33, and the F-94 one of the most displayed aircraft around the world. But there you have it, a look at the United States' first combat jet aircraft that created a whole family of aircraft, including one of the most produced training jet aircraft in the world. While it didn't have a combat legacy like that of later jets, its importance to not only the development of jet aircraft, but to jet training cannot be overlooked. And because of this, I'm claiming this as one of the most important aircraft the United States ever built. But that's it for today. Thank you for joining me, and I look forward to talking to you on the next time.